Isaac Driscoll, 58, paid for his daughter Jenna's entire wedding. 2 months later, the event coordinator called with security footage she insisted he see alone. There, 20 minutes before the first dance, Jenna stood in the hallway, phone to ear. He doesn't suspect a thing. The assets transfer hits Monday, and then I'm out. Isaac had 48 hours to decide, confront his daughter, or freeze his accounts before she took everything. My name is Isaac Driscoll. I grew up welding seams in factories that no longer exist, the kind of work that leaves your hands scarred and your instincts sharp. After my wife passed, all I had left was a quiet house, and the belief that my daughter Jenna was the one good thing that came out of all those years. That footage from the wedding hallway didn't just break my heart, it rewired my entire understanding of who I'd raised. And here is what nobody tells you about a quiet man pushed too far. He doesn't panic. He doesn't freeze. He simply remembers every lesson life ever taught him. And he begins to move. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of Olmsted Events for 20 minutes. Hands on the wheel, engine off, the kind of stillness that settles in when your brain is trying to catch up with your eyes. The footage looped in my head. Jenna's back against that hallway wall, phone cord trailing from her ear. The exact moment she said, "He doesn't suspect a single thing." She never said my name, but I knew. I was the only he whose assets she could drain. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. And Danny? The quiet accountant who barely spoke 3 sentences during our first dinner? He had to be involved. Nobody empties a man's accounts without their spouse knowing. Not unless that spouse is either complicit or clueless, and I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. I drove home through Elgin in the early October dusk, past the hardware store I'd visited every Saturday for 20 years, past the diner where my wife and I used to split pancakes after church. That woman would have known what to do. She read people the way I read blueprints. She'd have seen this coming before the wedding invitations even went out. I pulled into my driveway, the same modest house we'd bought in '94, and for the first time in the 3 years since she died, I was grateful she wasn't here to witness what came next. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to my office, the small room off the kitchen where I keep the filing cabinet with every financial document I'd ever accumulated. The will, the trust, the deed to the house, the account statements from 40 years of careful saving. I pulled out the folder marked Jenna and spread the contents across my desk. I hadn't looked at this file since before the wedding. But now, I needed to see the full picture. What I found made me stop breathing for a full 5 seconds. 6 months ago, Jenna had asked me to add her as a joint signatory on my main savings account. She framed it as a precaution. She said if anything happened to me, she'd need immediate access to handle my affairs, avoid probate, take care of the house. I agreed. She was my daughter, my only child, and after Carol died, I'd stopped second-guessing her motives. The paperwork had been signed, notarized, filed. I'd never checked whether she'd removed the limits on wire transfers. I checked now. She hadn't. As of that moment, Jenna could move up to $100,000 per day out of my account without triggering any alarm. That's when the timeline snapped into focus. She'd asked for that access just after she got engaged. She'd planned the wedding with my money, and now she was using the aftermath to clean out the rest. The transfer Monday would be the final push, a wire large enough to empty the account she had access to and leave me with nothing but the house, which was still in my name, but only because she hadn't figured out how to take it yet. I sat in the dark, surrounded by bank statements and betrayal, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Focus. I needed to understand Danny's role. He'd seemed harmless. a number cruncher with soft hands and a tendency to avoid eye contact. But quiet men worry me. I'd been a quiet man my whole life, and I knew what we were capable of. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the texts between Jenna and me over the past few months. One caught my eye, from 3 days after the wedding. She'd written Danny might stop by to pick up the leftover sparklers. He said he wants to talk to you about a retirement investment opportunity. He never came. I'd assumed he forgot. Now I wondered if that was the moment he'd chickened out, or the moment they'd realized they needed more time. By midnight, I had a plan. Not a full one, but a framework. Gwen had given me a copy of the hallway footage and the original audio file. I'd also asked her if there was more. Anything else from that night that might show what happened before or after that phone call. She'd said she'd check the server and get back to me. That call came at 6:40 the next morning. I was already awake, making coffee in the dark, when my phone buzzed with a message from her. It was one line, "I found something. You need to come back to the office immediately." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about money. If there was more footage, there was something worse. Something I hadn't seen yet. Something my daughter had done in that building while I was sitting 200 feet away, toasting her happiness with a glass of cheap champagne. I was in the truck before the coffee finished brewing, and by the time I pulled into Gwen's lot, I'd already decided I would not confront Jenna. Not yet. First, I would see what was on that new recording. Then I would begin to dismantle whatever she and Danny had built against me, piece by piece, from the shadows. Because the one advantage of being a retired welder who'd spent 40 years solving problems nobody else could see is that I knew exactly how to find the weakest point in any structure. And families, I'd learned, are no different. Gwen Olmsted was waiting at the front door of her office, which is never a good sign. Gwen is a woman who normally radiates the calm of someone who has handled weeping brides, drunk uncles, and cake catastrophes without raising her voice. But that morning, she looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was pulled back too tight, and her hands were trembling slightly as she let me in. "I debated whether to show you this," she said, leading me down the same hallway to the same monitor. "And I need you to understand, Isaac, that I'm showing you this as a father, not as a client. The recording I'm about to play isn't from the night of the reception." She paused. "It's from the morning of the rehearsal, 3 days earlier. I missed it during the initial review because it was logged under a different storage partition. Security backup from the bridal suite. The bridal suite was a small room on the second floor of the barn used for dressing and makeup. It had a motion-activated camera in the corner near the ceiling, installed to monitor access to the private spaces. Gwen had never needed to review any of that footage before. She clicked play. The screen lit up with a wide-angle view of the room, furniture draped in dusty light from the window. Jenna was sitting on the small settee, still in street clothes, phone in hand. The audio caught her voice. Calm, rehearsed. "No, Mom. He's completely clueless. It's honestly sad. I thought he'd be sharper after all those years in the shop." She laughed. The shop was how she'd always described my welding career when she thought it sounded quaint. "I know. I know. The account access is already in place. I signed the papers Wednesday. He thinks it's for his protection. Monday, I initiate the transfer. Everything that isn't nailed down moves to the new account in Rockford, the joint one Danny opened for us. After that, we wait about 6 weeks, file the divorce, and move." Pause. "Danny doesn't know about the house yet. I'll handle that separately." I made Gwen pause it. I had to. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my temples. She hadn't said Dad. She hadn't said Isaac. She'd called her mother. Carol, my dead wife. The woman who'd been in the ground for 3 years. Jenna was on the phone with someone she was calling Mom. "Gwen," I said, my voice coming out strange and flat, "I need the whole recording, and I need you to tell me if there's any trace of who she was talking to." She shook her head. "It's a cell call, not routed through the venue. I can't trace it. But there's more." She fast-forwarded. Later in the same recording, Jenna stood up, walked to the window, glanced at her reflection. "No, I haven't told anyone. Danny thinks I'm getting the money for a house. He doesn't need to know the rest. The account is in my name only, so when I close it, he's not entitled to anything. He'll be fine. He's got his job. He'll be fine." She laughed again, a bright, brittle sound. "Don't worry, Mom. By August, I'll be 2,000 miles away, and none of them will ever find me. Isaac's too old and too broken to do anything. I've seen his bank statements. He'll be fine. He'll just wither, like the garden." Then the screen went black. I sat in the chair across from Gwen's desk, unable to speak. I'd walked into that building thinking my daughter was a thief. I'd prepared to fight a greedy child. What I'd just learned was something else entirely. Jenna was not just stealing from me. She was stealing from her husband. She was planning to vanish, and whoever she was talking to, she was calling her mom. My wife had been dead 3 years. I attended her funeral. I held her hand as she died. So who, exactly, had Jenna been calling Mom? Gwen was watching me carefully. "Isaac, I've been in this business for 22 years. I've seen families fracture over forgotten RSVPs. I've never seen anything like this. If what she said is on that recording is a plan, not a fantasy, then you have exactly 4 days. Today is Friday. The transfer hits Monday. You need to decide what you're going to do." I thanked her, took the flash drive with both recordings, and walked back to my truck. The sun was fully up now. I sat in the driver's seat, key in the ignition, and I did what I always did when I faced a structural failure. I mapped the load points. Jenna needed access to my accounts, access I'd freely given her. If I simply froze them, she'd know I was onto her and might accelerate whatever escape plan she had. If I confronted her, she'd lie, twist the knife, maybe even accuse me of something to deflect. If I went to Danny, I'd be gambling that he was an innocent party and not her accomplice. And if I was wrong about that, I'd be handing them both a heads up. I needed information. So I drove straight to the branch of Great Lakes Credit Union, where my accounts were held, walked in, and asked to speak to the manager. Her name was Patricia Ruiz, a compact woman in her 50s with the kind of no-nonsense haircut that told you she'd seen every scam in the book. I told her I needed to add a confirmation protocol to my joint savings account, something that would flag any wire over $5,000 with a verbal verification call to my cell phone. She pulled up my file. She froze. "Mr. Driscoll," she said slowly, "I recognize you. I remember opening this account with you and your wife 20 years ago. But I should let you know, the joint signatory on this account isn't just Jenna. It's also a secondary signatory we added 3 months ago, per your authorization. A woman named Carol Driscoll." I felt the floor drop. I had not authorized any such thing. I'd signed nothing. And Carol Driscoll was dead. Patricia turned the screen to show me the digital signature on file. It was my name. But it wasn't my signature. It was a perfect forgery, close enough to pass a quick glance, but to my eye, the angle of the eye was wrong. Someone had gone into my bank impersonating me and added Carol Driscoll back onto the account. I told Patricia I had not done this. Her face went pale, and then it went hard. the way faces do when a professional realizes she's sitting on a fraud that happened on her watch. She began pulling records, security footage from the day of the authorization. The visit had occurred on a Thursday morning. The security log showed a man with a gray beard, ball cap pulled low, presenting my driver's license. He knew my account number. He knew my mother's maiden name. He knew everything. And he wasn't me. I asked if she could tell me who the man was. She couldn't, not yet. But she would call me. In the meantime, she put an immediate freeze on all outgoing transfers from my savings account. The $100,000 daily limit was now zero. Nothing could move without my physical presence and a fingerprint. I drove home with my mind racing. Someone out there had a fake ID in my name, knew enough about me to bypass my bank's security, and was working with my daughter, who was calling some woman mom. This was no longer about a greedy child. This was an organized, multi-step fraud that had been in motion for months, maybe longer. I went straight to my office, pulled out every piece of paper I had, and started building a timeline. I cross-referenced Jenna's visits home, the dates she'd asked for account access, the date of the forged authorization. I mapped Danny's introduction into our lives. He'd appeared about 18 months ago, met through a mutual friend I'd never actually met, started dating Jenna quickly, proposed fast. The rush had felt romantic. Now it felt like a closing window. Then I pulled out a specific piece of paper I'd almost forgotten about, my wife's death certificate. Carol Driscoll died September 12, 2021. But I'd also kept her old passport, which I'd never reported lost. It was missing. I'd thought I'd lost it in the mess after her death. Now I knew where it had gone. Whoever was playing mom had Carol's passport. They had her name. They had enough of her identity to walk into a bank, pretend to be me, and add her back onto an account. I called Danny, not to confront him, but to test him. He answered on the second ring. I kept my voice casual. Hey, Danny, you got a minute? I wanted to ask you about that investment thing Jenna mentioned a while back. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. Investment thing? He said. Yeah, she said you wanted to talk about a retirement thing. I've been thinking about it. Figured we could grab coffee. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, right, yeah, sure, I've just been buried. Can we do it early next week? Maybe Monday? Monday, the day the transfer was supposed to hit. I said sure, casually, and hung up. I now knew two things. Danny was definitely involved, and whatever they had planned was set to culminate on Monday. They'd been waiting for that day. I was now inside their timeline, working backward. I spent the rest of that day and all of Saturday gathering what I called my trap. I didn't have the resources of a detective, but I had something better: 40 years of knowing how things break. I hired a private forensic accountant named Marcus Okonkwo, a referral from an old union buddy who'd gone through his own financial betrayal. Marcus agreed to work through the weekend for a rush fee. By Saturday night, he called me back with something that made me sit down very slowly. The Carol Driscoll who'd been added to my account was also listed as a signatory on a business checking account in Rockford, Illinois, under the name C. Driscoll Holdings. That account had been opened in October of last year, using Carol's passport and a new driver's license with a similar photo. The woman in the ID photo was not my wife. It was a woman in her late 40s with cropped gray hair and cheekbones that didn't match Carol's at all. But the resemblance was just good enough to pass a casual glance. The same woman had also co-signed a lease on a property in Rockford with a man named Alan Pruitt. I didn't know that name, but when Marcus sent me the property records, I saw that Alan Pruitt's listed employer was the same accounting firm where Danny worked. That was the moment the full shape of it came into focus. Jenna had been recruited. Or maybe she'd recruited them. Danny was the inside man, using his job to provide financial cover and knowledge. The woman posing as my dead wife was their key, someone they trusted who could walk into a bank with Carol's passport and build the shell company that would receive my money. Monday morning, the transfer would empty my accounts into C. Driscoll Holdings. By Tuesday, that money would be dispersed into a dozen smaller accounts, untraceable. And by the time I noticed, Jenna, Danny, and the mystery woman would be gone, and I'd be left with an empty house and a bank account that said I'd given everything away voluntarily. But I still had one advantage they didn't know about. I had Gwen's footage. I had proof of their intent. And I had a narrow window to act before they realized the freeze was in place. I called Marcus again and told him to monitor the C. Driscoll Holdings account for activity. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called the Elgin police detective who'd handled my wife's estate theft case years ago. A man named Detective Lawrence Holt, retired now, but still connected. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Isaac, you've got a rare thing. You've got footage. You've got a paper trail. You've got a motivated forensic accountant. What you don't have is time. If that transfer was set for Monday, they'll know the account is frozen the moment they try to pull the trigger. When they realize you're onto them, they could run. They could destroy evidence. Even worse, if they're desperate, they could try to protect themselves by discrediting you. I want you to do something for me. Don't be alone tomorrow." I took his advice. I asked my neighbor, an old welder friend named Pete, to stay over. I made coffee. I sat in my living room with the lights off, waiting for Monday to arrive. And at 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Jenna. Her voice was sweetness, the kind she used when she wanted something. "Hey, Dad. Just checking in. I wanted to make sure we're still on for brunch tomorrow, after the bank stuff. I know you said you'd meet me there at 10. I hadn't said any such thing. I didn't even know what bank she meant. But I heard the strain underneath her voice, the tension of someone who knew the biggest day of her plan was hours away. "Sure, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'll be there." 10. She hung up. I didn't. I looked at the digital recorder I'd placed on the end table, its red light still blinking. I'd been recording the call. Now I had her voice, coordinating a meeting on the morning of the transfer. When Monday morning came, I would not be at that bank. But I would be everywhere else she didn't expect, watching from the shadows as the trap she'd built for me began to close around her instead. Monday morning, the sun came up cold and clean over Elgin. I was parked across the street from Great Lakes Credit Union before the doors unlocked, a cup of gas station coffee in my hand and Pete beside me nursing his own. Patricia had called at 7 sharp. The system showed a pending wire transfer request initiated at 6:30 that morning from an IP address in Rockford. $147,000 destined for an account titled C. Driscoll Holdings. The transfer didn't go through. The freeze held. Patricia had followed my instructions. She'd flagged the attempt, blocked the wire, and sent an automated notification to the account holder. Which meant, right now, Jenna and whoever was behind her knew the money wasn't moving. The clock had just flipped in my favor. Pete leaned back in his seat. "So what now, Isaac? You go in there and let them explain themselves?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I want to see what they do when they realize the trap is set. If they panic, they'll make mistakes, and I need to know who else is involved." Marcus Okonkwo called 20 minutes later. He'd been tracing the C. Driscoll Holdings account all weekend and had just found something new. The account had received 3 small deposits over the past 2 months, each between $5,000 and $10,000, all from different personal checking accounts. All the accounts belonged to elderly individuals, all widowed, all living alone. None of them had reported the transactions as fraudulent. They probably didn't even know they'd been made. "It's a feeder pattern," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Someone is skimming small amounts from vulnerable accounts, consolidating them in Rockford, and then transferring the lump sum abroad. Your account was the big one. The final score. Once they emptied it, the whole structure would disappear within hours." I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. This wasn't a greedy daughter acting alone. This was a systematic operation. And the only connection between those elderly victims and my account was Danny. He worked at the accounting firm that managed their finances. He had access to their account numbers, their signatures, their trust. For 18 months, he'd been running a quiet racket from inside the firm, bleeding people dry in amounts too small to notice. My daughter had given him the keys to the biggest payout of all, her own father. I forwarded everything to Detective Holt, who'd been working the case on the sly with his former colleagues at the Elgin PD. By 10 o'clock, he'd pulled Danny's personnel file, the leasing records for the Rockford property, and the security footage from the day the fake Carol's ID was used at my bank. The man in the ball cap and gray beard was Alan Pruitt, Danny's uncle. The woman in the ID photo was his wife, Linda Pruitt. They'd been running identity scams for nearly a decade, moving from state to state, targeting family networks. They'd married into families, dated into them, used their own children as fronts. And this time, their in was my daughter. But here's the thing I couldn't shake. Jenna had called that woman Mom. Not Linda, not some fake name. Mom, that word wouldn't come out of her mouth unless the connection ran deeper than a con. I pulled my wife Carol's old medical records from the filing cabinet, the ones from her final months. I hadn't looked at them since she died. Now I did. And halfway through the folder, I found a note from her oncologist, dated 2 months before her death, that I'd never seen. Carol had asked, in a private consultation I wasn't present for, whether her cancer could be linked to the stress of her estranged sister's reappearance. Her estranged sister. Carol never spoke about her family. She'd told me her parents were gone, no siblings alive, but there it was in blue ink, a sister named Linda who had reached out after 20 years of silence. The same name, the same timeline. The woman who'd faked my wife's identity wasn't a stranger. She was my wife's sister, my daughter's aunt, and Jenna had known her, maybe even before the diagnosis. I sat in my living room, the paper trembling in my hands. Pete was watching me, not saying a word. I needed to know how deeply Jenna was buried in this. I needed to know if my daughter was a victim or a willing co-conspirator. And I needed to know before the law got to her first. At exactly 11, I drove to the cafe where Jenna wanted to meet. It was a little place off Randall Road, the kind with mismatched chairs and a barista who knew our regular orders. Jenna was already there, sitting at a corner table, her face calm and open. She dressed down for it, jeans, a soft sweater, the same look she wore when she wanted to appear harmless. Across from her sat Danny, pale and stiff in a button-down that looked like it had been slept in. They weren't expecting me to bring Pete, who slid into a booth by the door and gave me a nod. They weren't expecting the burner phone in my pocket recording every word they said, or the fact that Detective Holt was in a parked car 2 blocks away listening. "Dad," Jenna said, her smile quick and nervous. "You're early. I ordered you a coffee." I sat down. I didn't touch the coffee. I got held up at the bank. Her smile froze. Danny's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. "The bank?" she repeated, her voice carefully light. "I thought we weren't doing that until after brunch." "No," I said, matching her tone. "I decided to go early. There was a problem with my account. A freeze. No wires going out." The color drained from her face so fast I could practically watch the lie drain with it. Danny shifted in his chair, and for a second I saw something flash behind his accountant's eyes. Something hard and scared. Jenna tried to recover. "What do you mean?" "I don't understand." "Let me be plain," I said. "The account you tried to empty this morning is frozen. The woman who posed as my dead wife to get on it? Her name is Linda Pruitt. Her husband Alan is the man who forged my ID. And the accountant you married, the one sitting right here, has been running a skimming operation through his firm for over a year." I looked directly at Danny. "How many elderly widows did you drain before you came for me? 3? 4? Danny opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Jenna made a small sound, something between a gasp and a choke. But I wasn't finished. "And the thing I really need to know, Jenna, the thing that kept me up all night, is why you've been calling that woman Mom. Your mother died in my arms 3 years ago. So who exactly is Linda to you?" Jenna's composure shattered. She started to cry, not the dramatic kind, but the real, wet, ugly kind you can't fake. She kept shaking her head, trying to form words. Danny reached for her hand, and she snatched it away like his touch burned. "I didn't know about the others," she whispered. "I didn't know about the widows. I thought it was just us." I leaned forward. "Just us? What does that mean?" She looked at me, eyes red, and said something that made every other piece of this puzzle click into place in the worst possible way. "I thought she was my mom. My real mom. Linda told me Carol lied to you. She told me I was her daughter, that Carol stole me as a baby. And I believed her." The air in that calf went dead silent. Danny's face twisted with something I couldn't read. Maybe guilt. Maybe terror. Maybe both. I stared at my daughter, and for a long moment I didn't see a 26-year-old woman. I saw the little girl I'd taught to swim, the teenager who'd cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak, the bride who'd danced with me at her wedding. And now I saw someone who'd been lied to for months by people who'd weaponized the most fundamental truth of her identity. I took a breath, then another. I had a choice to make. I could lose her now, let the cops sweep in and arrest her as part of the ring. Or I could pull her out, use her as the linchpin to bring down the Pruitts for good. But to do that, I needed something from her that no daughter should ever have to give me. I needed her to wear a wire and go back to the people who'd robbed her of her entire sense of self. I looked at Pete by the door. Pete, who'd been my friend for 30 years and knew what I was thinking. He gave me a single, slow nod. I turned back to Jenna. "You're going to help me end this," I said quietly. "But first, you need to tell me everything. And Jenna, I mean everything. Starting with the moment Linda first contacted you, and ending with whatever was supposed to happen after they left me with nothing." Down the street, a police radio crackled. The net was tightening. And somewhere in Rockford, Linda and Alan Pruitt were still waiting for a transfer that was never going to come. Jenna told us everything. Right there in the calf, voice cracking, eyes fixed on the table, she laid out 18 months of manipulation like she was reading a script she'd only just realized was a tragedy. Linda first contacted her through a private message on social media 3 weeks after Carol's funeral. She said she was Jenna's aunt, that she'd been estranged from the family for decades, and that she had something important to share about Jenna's birth. The message was specific, intimate, full of details that only someone who'd known Carol intimately could have known. the name of the hospital where Jenna was born, the doctor's name, the fact that Carol had been hospitalized with complications. But Linda twisted every fact. She claimed that Carol had been unable to conceive, that she'd taken Jenna from Linda after a surrogacy arrangement went wrong, that Isaac had been complicit in the lie, that the whole life Jenna had known was built on a theft. Jenna didn't believe it at first. She blocked Linda, tried to forget. But Linda was patient. She sent photos, a birth certificate with Linda's name on it, a forgery, we'd later learn, and a series of letters from Carol that had been stolen from my filing cabinet during one of Danny's visits. She built a paper trail that looked convincing to a grieving daughter. And the more Jenna pulled away from me, the more she leaned into Danny, who, it turned out, had been planted purely to nurture that dependency. Danny and Jenna didn't meet by chance. Alan Pruitt, working with a recruiter, had placed Danny in the accounting firm with explicit instructions to pursue my daughter. Everything, from their first date to their rushed engagement, had been choreographed to get Jenna into a position where she would willingly hand over access to my accounts. By the time Jenna realized she was in too deep, she'd already signed the joint signatory paperwork, added the fake Carol to the account, and participated in rehearsing the hallway phone call at the venue, the one that Gwen Olmsted caught on camera. The call was staged, a performance designed to be overheard if anyone ever asked questions. But Jenna hadn't known about the skimming from the elderly widows. She'd believed the operation was limited to our family. When I told her about the feeder accounts, the targeting of vulnerable strangers, something in her face closed off for good. She looked at Danny, and the question she asked wasn't for me. "Did you know the whole time?" Danny didn't answer, which was its own answer. Detective Holt, who'd been listening from the patrol car, walked in 5 minutes later with 2 uniformed officers. They arrested Danny on the spot. He didn't resist. He just stood up, straightened his shirt, and said quietly, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. Jenna didn't look at him as he was let out. She was already turning her phone toward me, already asking what she needed to do next. What she needed to do was call Linda Pruitt. The plan was simple. Jenna would tell Linda that the transfer had been delayed due to a bank error, that I suspected nothing, and that they needed to meet in person to finalize the alternative transfer route. Linda, who'd been waiting in Rockford for confirmation, would be eager. We'd chosen a small diner off Interstate 90 as the meeting point, neutral ground. Holt's team would be inside, waiting, and I would be in the parking lot with Pete, listening to every word through the wire they'd fitted to Jenna's jacket. The call went perfectly. Linda's voice on speaker was warm, almost maternal, but there was an edge of impatience. "Delayed? Jenna, sweetheart, you said this would be seamless. We can't afford delays. Alan is getting nervous." Jenna played her part, voice trembling just enough, saying she was scared, that she needed to see her mom. Linda softened. They agreed to meet at 4 o'clock. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in the passenger seat of Pete's truck, earpiece in, listening to Holt's team run through their positions. Pete didn't say much, just handed me a thermos of coffee and let the silence do its work. I kept thinking about the moment I first held Jenna in the hospital, the way Carol had looked at her with such fierce, exhausted joy. There was no way that woman had stolen anyone's child, but the damage Linda had done wasn't about truth, it was about making Jenna doubt the only people who'd ever loved her. At 4:02, a silver sedan pulled into the diner lot. Alan Pruitt was driving, his gray beard unmistakable. Linda sat beside him, her cropped hair and sharp cheekbones exactly as they appeared on the fake ID. They walked inside, scanned the room, spotted Jenna in a corner booth. I could hear every word through the receiver. Linda slid in across from her, Alan standing like a sentinel. "Sweetheart," Linda said. What happened at the bank? We tried the wire this morning and got a rejection. Jenna's voice was small. I don't know. Dad said something about a freeze, but he doesn't suspect anything. He thinks it's a glitch. He gave me the account number again this morning. She slid a piece of paper across the table. Here, I wrote down the new routing number for the backup account. He doesn't know I have it. Linda took the paper, inspected it. This is the credit union's bypass number? How'd you get this? From his desk, Jenna said. He keeps everything. I wanted it to be over. I want to come home. Linda's expression softened, but I saw the calculation behind it. She needed Jenna's cooperation for this last part. The money was too close to lose. Soon, baby, as soon as we get this through. Alan will take the number to the bank now, we'll do a test transfer, and then we go home. All of us. That was the cue. Holt's officers moved in from 3 directions. Alan saw them first, lunged for the door, but he was met by 2 detectives who had come in through the back. Linda's face contorted from warmth to fury in a split second. She grabbed Jenna's wrist, but Jenna pulled back, and that's when Holt's voice cut through. Linda Pruitt, Alan Pruitt, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and elder exploitation. The handcuffs went on, the Miranda rights recited, and for a moment Linda's eyes found mine through the diner window. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked like a woman who'd gambled on a long con and lost everything in one afternoon. The aftermath took weeks to untangle. The forensic audit Marcus Okonkwo completed revealed that the Pruitts had stolen over $600,000 from vulnerable seniors across 3 states. Danny accepted a plea deal in exchange for full testimony. He'd been a minor player, he claimed, but that minor player had provided the account numbers and the insider knowledge that made the whole operation possible. He was sentenced to 7 years. Alan Pruitt, who had a prior record of fraud stretching back to 2005, got 12. Linda, the architect of the family manipulation, was charged with 18 counts and faces decades. But the hardest part came after the arrests. Jenna sat in my living room, wrapped in Carol's old quilt, and asked me the question she'd been avoiding. Is she really my aunt? Am I really? Did Mom really take me? I'd been preparing for this. I handed her a folder I'd assembled with Holt's help. Inside were the birth records from the hospital, the DNA analysis of Carol's hair and Jenna's blood, arranged discreetly through a private lab, and the death certificate of the real Linda, Carol's sister, who had died in a car accident in 1989, the same year Carol and I married. The woman who'd called herself Linda Pruitt was born Margaret Sibley, a career con artist who'd stolen the identity of Carol's deceased sister after reading an old obituary. She'd studied Carol's letters, learned our family history, and weaponized it all. There was no surrogacy, no theft, just a cruel, brilliant lie designed to isolate my daughter and empty my accounts. Jenna cried for a long time. I didn't speak. I just sat beside her, the way I'd done when she was small and the world seemed too big. Eventually, she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, I was going to leave you with nothing. I took her hand. You were lied to by people who knew exactly which wounds to press. I don't blame you for bleeding. She shook her head. But I still did it. I still signed the papers. I still went along. I nodded. And today, you wore a wire and put the people who did this to you in handcuffs. We don't get perfect justice. We get the version we earn. I told her she'd have a lot of work to do, rebuilding trust and making amends to the victims. I told her I'd help. I told her the house would always be hers if she wanted it. But I also told her that she'd have to sit with what happened. Really sit with it and decide who she wanted to be. As she left that night, Heading to a friend's place where she'd agreed to stay for a while, she paused at the door. "Dad?" "Yeah, that footage from the hallway. I still can't believe Gwen found it." I almost smiled. "I can. She's been doing this a long time." Jenna nodded, and for a second I saw the daughter I'd raised, the one who used to help me in the garden, who'd pruned the apricot tree at 6 years old with a pair of scissors because she wanted to be like me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," I said. "Me too." Later that night, alone in the house, I walked out back to the apricot tree. It was heavy with fruit, more than I'd seen in years. I stood there in the dark, thinking about Carol, about how she'd planted that tree the year we moved in, about the secrets families carry and the ones that almost destroy them. I thought about the event coordinator's whisper, the footage that could have broken everything. And I thought about the stranger I'd seen in that hallway. She wasn't a stranger now, she was my daughter, and she'd chosen to come back. That was the only currency that mattered now. Not time, not money, but the choice to stay when running was easier. I picked one apricot, the ripest one I could find, and ate it standing there in the dark. It was sweet, and that, I decided, was enough. I still prune that apricot tree every autumn, the way Carol taught me. Some branches need cutting back so the rest can bear fruit. That's the lesson I took from those 48 hours when everything I believed about my daughter turned out to be a story someone else had written for her. People ask me whether I've forgiven Jenna. I don't have a clean answer for that. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a season. The tree doesn't care whether the winter was fair, only that spring came eventually. Spring came for us. Jenna is working now, paying back what she can to the Victims Fund, attending counseling, rebuilding the trust that Linda Pruitt spent 18 months methodically dismantling. Some days I look at her and see the little girl who stole my safety goggles and wore them while she dug in the garden. Other days I see a grown woman with a weight in her eyes she'll carry forever. That weight is the cost of believing a lie about the people who love you, and then having to earn back your own story. The Pruitt's operation was bigger than one family. Before they were stopped, they'd stolen identities across 5 states, targeting widows and widowers who'd buried their spouses and assumed their savings were safe. What Linda understood, and what makes her worse than any ordinary con artist, is that grief leaves a door open. When you lose the person who anchored your life, you're vulnerable to anyone who knows which key fits the lock. She used Carol's own handwriting to make Jenna believe she'd been stolen at birth. She used my dead wife's voice to hollow out our daughter's trust until only Linda's voice remained. And she did it not for revenge or passion, but for money. That's the coldest part. It was all transactional. The emotional devastation was just a tool. I'm 58 years old. I've welded bridges and built things that will outlast me. But I learned something in those days that I'd never needed to learn on any job site. When the people you love are turned against you, the only structural reinforcement that holds is what you've already built inside yourself. I'd been preparing my whole life without knowing it, reading people's true intentions in the way they shift their weight, checking for the weak points in a story the way I'd check for hairline cracks in a beam. And when my daughter sat across from me in that calf, finally ready to let the truth pour out, I saw the crack in the story Linda had told her. I saw that Jenna wanted to believe it because believing it meant her mother hadn't really died. Believing it meant she had a living mom who claimed to love her. The cruelest lies are the ones that give us something we desperately need. I'm telling you this story not because it's extraordinary, but because it isn't. Family fraud is the most common form of financial crime in America, and most victims never see the footage that changes everything. I got lucky. I got Gwen Olmsted, a woman who trusted her gut enough to review backup footage. I got a bank manager who took one look at a forged signature and decided she'd rather protect an old welder than cover her own liability. I got a retired detective who answered his phone on a Sunday. Most people don't get any of that. They just wake up one morning to empty accounts and a daughter who won't return their calls, and they never learn why. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Check on the people you love, especially the ones who've lost someone recently. Ask the uncomfortable questions. The person who seems the most trustworthy might be the one running the clock. And if you've made it this far, do me one quick favor. Subscribe to Dad's True Revenge. It sounds simple, but 97% of people watch these stories and never hit that button. It costs you nothing and means everything to us. Hit like, drop a comment, I read them, genuinely, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Because the next person who gets a whisper from an event coordinator might not be as lucky as I was. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.